As someone who has spent a lot of time in MMORPGs over the years, nothing pains me more than seeing the totally preventable downfall of the Elder Scrolls Online. I mean, seriously, this game needs to be studied, and more importantly, the team behind it. Now, a full disclosure here, I might not cover it a lot on the channel, but I actually love ESO. I've loved the Elder Scrolls franchise from as long as it came out, for as far back as I can actually remember. In my personal opinion, the Elder Scrolls Online should have been the MMO that absolutely dominated the genre, period, no competition whatsoever. It literally had everything going for it. A legendary franchise, a massive open world to explore, unique combat systems, and a fan base that had been dreaming of something like this for years, dreaming about playing an online version of Oblivion or Skyrim with their friends. On paper, at least to me, this was the chosen one, the fated MMO that everyone was crying out for, and it looked likely that it would rival that of World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. And for a while, I would like to say there were some golden days of ESO. It really did kind of hold that particular niche. It really did quite well, but instead of rising to greatness and staying there, something else happened. After many years of being released now, ESO is, I guess it's only fair to say, it's a shadow of what it could have been. This, unfortunately, was a game that was filled with brilliance and optimism, but was really heavily weighed down by obvious mismanagement and, well, misguided priorities. There are many decisions that have happened over the life cycle of the game which are questionable at best, and I firmly believe this has choked and squandered its potential. In today's video, I really want to take a look, a bit of a deep dive, if you will, into what made ESO so special and, well, how ZeniMax repeatedly undercut its own success, and if there's any hope for it going forward. This will be the tragic story of an MMO that I personally love, that has subsequently been ran into the ground. I do just want to state here, I do enjoy a lot of elements of ESO still, and if you're one of those people that really enjoy the game still, then just ignore the outside noise, go about it. But I'm here to address the obvious, and the obvious is something that a lot of people are feeling within the space. In my opinion, the Elder Scrolls Online launched with a level of prestige that no other MMO really could have come close to. When people heard the words Elder Scrolls and Online in the same sentence, well, the expectations, as you can imagine, skyrocketed, and instantly so. Now, at the time, you've got to bear in mind, this wasn't a new IP like something like Guild Wars, for example. You know, when Guild Wars 1 first came out, this was a direct continuation of a universe that people already adored. If we look at Skyrim, for example, it had literally taken over the world. People were fully immersed in the culture of the Elder Scrolls, mainly because of that game. Yes, you could argue there's Morrowind and Oblivion and many games that came before that, but Skyrim really was the most accessible in the genre thus far. What absolutely blew my mind is the setting of ESO was perfect. Tamriel, you know, it's a place that even if you didn't know it, you would come to love. As a setting, it is incredibly lore-rich. It's filled with iconic regions that players could begin to explore and fall in love with and call home. The idea that we could finally visit places like Elsewhere and Somerset Isle, areas that had only ever been mentioned in books, made ESO feel like a dream come true. But the world wasn't the only thing ESO had going for it, far from it. The concept of an action-focused combat system in an MMO at the time was really, really refreshing. You have to remember, at this period of time, we were so used to traditional tab target games, and ESO offered movement-heavy, skill-based, directional combat that felt fast, it felt fluid, and much closer to an ARPG. Now, don't get me wrong, by today's standards, it still feels slightly off, but at the time, you know, it was fairly new. The point is, it was a system that was implemented at a time where it could definitely have evolved into something with enough work going forwards. And let's not forget about the sheer scope of the game. The sheer size of the game at the time was unmatched. And well, ZeniMax, they had the freedom to explore the entire continent if they wanted to. For example, every race, culture, and region of Tamriel could have become its own expansion, its own story arc, and its own slice of living world building. And, you know, they've explored some elements of that, but really the potential was unlimited. What's even crazier is ESO launched into a market that was begging for something different at this point. World of Warcraft was ultimately declining, Final Fantasy XIV was still rebuilding from its original 1.0 disaster, and players were just hungry for the next best thing. This is why it pains me to say that ESO could have been the MMO of the decade, and I don't say that lightly. It had the backing, the world, the lore, and most importantly, a dedicated fan base. The reality is it had everything it needed apart from the execution. One thing that I and many players loved about ESO was that at launch, it had a traditional RPG structure. That means that zones had levels, enemies had levels. You progressed from easier regions into more difficult ones. This meant that you felt your character getting stronger because the world changed around you. There were places you simply just weren't ready for that you just couldn't visit yet. And then came 1 Tamriel, the update that scaled the entire world to your character's level. And well, let's just say that that decision was received in a mixed manner for sure. Outside of the way it was received, one thing was definite. It definitely dismantled one of the most important pillars of an MMO, and that's progression. Suddenly, everything in the world, from wolves to bandits to Daedra, scaled directly to you. It really didn't matter what you were fighting because every fight felt the same. Every fight ended the same. It was just the same stats on a different character model. It didn't matter if you were level 5 or level 50. Every enemy magically adjusted itself so that you could kill it, and it became very easy and very tedious really quickly. I mean, sure enough, it's convenient. It means that every zone in the game can still be quested in at whatever level. You can go wherever you like and nothing is missed. But that does mean that there is a casualty here, and that casualty alongside progression is difficulty. With the 1 Tamriel update, ZeniMax didn't just give players freedom, they kind of erased the danger. There were no high-level zones, there were no harder regions as such, no sense that you were moving from safe areas to deadly ones. The world just felt flat, or at least it did to me, kind of weightless. It was fun to explore, it was very lore-rich, but it had no stakes. There was no real cause for concern. And because enemies essentially had to be beatable by brand new players, the designers had to make them weak enough for beginners to handle them, which meant they couldn't threaten experienced veteran players at all, really. Most vets started mowing down world enemies like they were made of wet, soggy tissue paper, and the overland combat became trivial to the point of boredom. And this doesn't stop just at the overworld content as well. You've got to bear in mind that there are delves, there are instances, world bosses as well that are incredibly casual friendly now, to say the least. I guess what I'm trying to say here is the entire open world lost its identity, that we know for sure. The zones just weren't difficult or dangerous. They were just there, waiting to be cleared with zero resistance. Now, again, I have to state, if you are a story fiend, an Elder Scrolls enjoyer, and combat really isn't your thing, then this really isn't going to bother you. But for most people, especially in an MMO space, this really hurt a lot. 1 Tamriel definitely brought convenience, but it killed challenge, immersion, and the feeling of becoming stronger. And that loss created ripple effects that still damage the game even today. Even if you were to ignore the design issues, ESO's biggest problem has, in my eyes, always been its performance. And this isn't an opinion that directly just comes from me. This comes from a multitude of different players on different systems. For nearly a decade now, the game has struggled with multiple issues, from skill delays, from desync in PvP, desync in Cyrodiil, frame drops in trials. The list really goes on. Now, of course, it's an MMO. It's not going to run perfectly, but really, given the premium that this game charges alongside all of its monetization, you would really think that this game should just perform a lot better than it does. Now, of course, the devs have tried to address this by implementing performance patch year after year, but the core issues never truly go away. I'm not much of a PvPer myself, but the PvP that I have been involved in, it can sometimes feel like when you press a skill, 1 or 2 seconds later, something actually happens. It's not all the time, but it does happen frequently enough for you to think, this probably shouldn't work like this. At least in my mind, the combat was designed to be fast, reactive, and now it just kind of feels sluggish and unpredictable at times. Now, I've had to do some digging for the Cyrodiil issues, if you like, because it's not something I really involved myself in, but from what I could see, Cyrodiil being the heart of ESO's PvP scene, it really does look like it struggles at times. There are stutters, there's freezes, there's skills not firing off properly, players rubber banding everywhere. Performance alone can drive players away, not just in the hundreds, but in their thousands. We know that an MMO can survive balancing issues. We know that an MMO can survive content droughts. God knows we've played enough MMOs to understand that, but it cannot fundamentally survive gameplay that isn't smooth and doesn't work. Eventually, people will hang up their hats and say, do you know what? It's not for me anymore. Now, to many, this is a controversial topic, what we're leading into now, because some just aren't really that arsed. They see it for what it is. And to others, it's a subject they just can't look past. And well, that's the combat. ESO's combat originally built itself around class identity. You know, back when Nightblades were like rogues or assassins, Templars were these holy warriors, so on and so forth. You get the drift. Then hybridization arrived, a huge change that would allow every class to essentially scale everything off of similar stats. Not to mention the obvious issue with multi-classing, but I feel like that's a story for a completely different video. But the idea was freedom, and the result was homogenization, ultimately. Now we're at a point where if you take the base classes, for an example, it feels like every class can just do everything to an extent. Sure, there might be some better than others, but really it doesn't really seem much of a difference. Now, with this in mind, when you sprinkle in some of the multi-classing that we're just going to briefly touch in now, what that means is that certain classes and certain combinations just become meta. No one touches anything else in the fear of A, either not doing enough damage, or B, not even being invited to the content in the first place. A game that put itself forward to have unlimited class potential, build potential if you like, now seems to have somewhat of a limited potential. Class identity evaporated, build variety just shrank, and most players run the same rotations and same 5 skills, the same sets over and over again. Unfortunately, it really now has become a game where you're gently shoved towards a handful of optimized meta builds. Or the reality is, as I said before, you just don't do the damage or don't get invited to stuff. The hard truth is that ZeniMax didn't just balance the freedom here, they've kind of erased the need for creativity entirely. What really baffled me really early on was that ESO's storytelling is one of its greatest strengths, but it's also part of why the gameplay has somewhat stagnated. Every single chapter has a focus heavily on narrative, amazing writing, amazing characters, voice actors. I mean, the voice actors they've had in this game, my God, it really is a story to be told by itself, but there are also many stunning zones. However, ESO seems to never really evolve the game's systems. Instead of expanding on mechanics, ZeniMax chooses to deliver, one new class every couple of years. Similar world bosses, similar delves, the list goes on. In my opinion, as a very casual player, and I'll say this up front, I am not a hardcore player here. I've not done a vast majority of the content in the game, but it becomes very apparent to even me that the content they create, although beautiful, plays somewhat similar to the content that came before it. My point is, ESO is very visually rich, but mechanically, it's very repetitive. The world is huge, as we've covered already, but it's somewhat hollow once you realize that nothing ever really changes. In my opinion, the game desperately needs a shakeup. It needs a reinvention of certain systems, not just another zone to quest through. Then let's talk about the obvious, the fucking Crown Store. The Crown Store is quite possibly one of the worst forms of monetization I have seen in any MMO, even over some Eastern MMOs. It is criminal. Everything in this store is absurdly priced, from housing to mounts, pets, motives. Everything is inflated to push players toward buying crowns. And let's be very real here and talk about the crates. The crates in this game, in my personal opinion, are predatory. They are. There's no other way to say it. Pretty much from the moment you step foot in the game as a new player, you are bombarded with hints towards the Crown Store, kind of enticed to spend. Veteran players, again, sunk cost fallacy. You guys are basically being exploited at this point. And I'm not adverse to spending money in a game that I enjoy being in. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I'm happy that people support the game they enjoy. But there's a difference between supporting a game and having your blood sucked. Every single year, the store gets more attention than the actual gameplay systems. And pretty much as an outsider, as a casual gamer, if I could see that, then God knows what some of you veterans are feeling. It's painfully clear that ZeniMax makes a lot of money through this system, but it leaves me asking, at what cost? What is the cost? Is it player trust? Because that's definitely what I'm leaning into. I'm not suggesting for a second that the monetization shouldn't exist in this game, but it definitely needs reinventing. There are a lot of things that I haven't added to this video that I have actually had written down that I want to explore further and perhaps make into a separate video. But I want to ask you this. If you are a player of ESO, a long-term player, someone with much more hours in the game than me, what are your pain points and what are you feeling with a game that you clearly love? How are you feeling about it right now? Are you someone that ignores the noise completely? plays, enjoys it as maybe a single-player RPG, or are you a hardcore raider, really into your trials and endgame content that's really feeling the sting right now? And again, I do enjoy ESO for the most part, but I just feel like for a game that could have propelled itself into untapped success, the driving force behind it being the studio has ultimately anchored it down. So to summarize, ESO could have been the perfect MMO. It really could have in many ways. And, you know, it still could be with a slight chance. The world undoubtedly is incredible. The lore is unmatched. The combat, when it works well, is fast, engaging, and rewarding, if not a little bit soft in spots. But ZeniMax, they ultimately made a series of decisions that hollowed out the game's identity. One Tamriel killed the difficulty. Performance issues continued to hiccup the experience. And, well, class identity is something that needs tapping into altogether. Not to mention the worst offender being the criminal monetization model in this game. And we didn't even touch on the monthly membership that is optional, but basically you need it if you want to pick up anything ever. So for those that have clicked on this video wondering if ESO is dead or dying, well, it is certainly wasting its potential. That's all I'm going to say. And the saddest part of all this is that most of these problems aren't impossible to fix. The game just needs a vision. It needs leadership. It needs a willingness, if you like, to rebuild some of these systems from the ground up that once made ESO feel so alive. I guess until that happens, ESO will remain one of the greatest MMOs that never really fully became what it was meant to be. If you enjoyed this sort of video, please do consider leaving a like rating, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you in the next one.